Hello and welcome to this video. Today marks part 2 of my Pokemon Diorama figure display, and this will actually be the last 2 displays. Now, if you remember last time I made a woodland themed one, and the next one I'm gonna make is in the medium box, and this one will be mountains. Now, the scenery is really simple. I'm just making some mountains out of aluminium foil, covering them with some paper mache, and afterwards I'm just gonna add some like glue and sand mixture to give it a little bit of texture. And basically this is gonna be for the rock Pokemon, for the fighting ones, and for the fire ones. Yes, exactly. I'm gonna add a bit that represents the fire Pokemon. Now, the reason why I'm actually going with sand is because it has a nice texture. Of course, you can make like a proper rock texture with using aluminium foil, pouring in some plaster, breaking that up into tiny pieces. Or you can use like a clay that you can texture with a rock or something like that. But I like the simplistic look, as I said before. I want this to look cartoonish. So I want a little bit of texture, a little bit of like surface texture with the sand and stuff, but I want it to be really simple. The figure should stand out. So all I'm doing, again, just like I always paint rock, is to paint it black and then add lighter and lighter layers of dry brush. So I'm starting out with a light grey and ending with a white. Now to the fire part. As you can see, I painted a piece of cardboard, or I guess this is more like cardstock, with some red and yellow. This is gonna represent the... I forgot which one was the flowing one, lava or magma. If you know, please tell me in the comments. I forgot. But I think it's lava, the flowing one. Magma should be the standing one. So yeah, basically I tried crackling paste for the first time, and it really worked quite well for the effect I was going for. I was going for the like soot on lava effect. And of course the sides for the sky cannot just be blue. There has to be like smoke and stuff from the heat and things burning. So I'm just basically like stippling on some red dots for being like sparks, and some grey and red to represent smoke. And all that's left now is actually assembling everything. So I'm just using my craft glue, spreading it all around, and then placing the paper inside. Now, I really haven't found a technique yet that avoids the paper warping. This glue normally is quite good with that, but for some reason with this it just really doesn't work. So there's like some slight bubbles, especially on the sides, but it's not too bad. Now, I also had some gaps in the bottom of the rock, so all I did was filling those with aluminium foil, and then I'm adding some tiny bits of paper clay, and this one I'm actually gonna texture with a rock. So I'm just gonna basically like flatten out all of the stonework in there, and of course the aluminium foil not only helps bulk the major part of it out and save me paper clay, but paper clay takes a bit longer to dry actually. So in actually having to use less, it will dry a bit better and actually crack less. So yeah, just to get the same texture, I'm actually not using a rock here, I'm using aluminium foil. But if you actually use the rock to texture your other stuff, using a rock again should be working well. And it basically gets the same treatment as the rest of the mountain, so black base coat and then white dry brush. Now, of course, I was impatient, so I went in too early, so it smudged a little bit, but I will fix that with another coat later. And lastly, I wanted to add a bit more smoke, and for that I'm just using a cotton ball that I like slightly rip apart. Now, this one is a naturally like grayish cotton ball, so I didn't have to color it, but you may have to like color it with some powdered chalk or something like that. Now that that's finished, let's actually go to Diorama 3. And this one will be a bit more involved. This one will be water type Pokemon, and all the leftover Pokemon basically I have. So I want to make this a tiered system, kind of like an underwater cave with like an underwater lake that has a ledge on top. Now to achieve that and to have enough surface to actually put Pokemon, I started out with making a base out of clear shaker film that I just completely covered with resin. That's gonna be our water surface. And then I'm gonna also make a lily pad for the water Pokemon that typically like not really swim, but kind of. I just thought it would look really nice and give a nice accent, and for this I'm just using some basic polymer clay, actually putting it into my baking dish. This had the perfect size. Cutting in some slots, and then I'm curing it and then painting it with some darker green to add like the veins of the leaf and make it look a bit more realistic. Still cartoonish, but slightly realistic, if that makes sense. Slightly more dimensional than just the green leaf. After attaching the lily pad, I'm adding a quite ludicrous amount of water texture paste. This stuff is really cool. Basically, you apply it on top of your project and it dries clear, and it has like a bit of a stiffer texture, so you can actually like apply a texture to it and it will keep it. Now people will also use silicone, clear silicone for this, which also works totally well. I just prefer this because it's a bit less messy. And afterwards it's time to make parts of the cave, so I'm using actually a lot of scrap pieces of foam here because I want to use them up, and you know, for rocks they don't need to be perfect. So this is gonna become the base, and then I have a top part. I'm adding some slits because that's where the water like layer will slot into. I wasn't really sure at which height, so I basically added them everywhere, but in the end it should work out. And then to actually make it, again, a rock texture, I'm super gluing on some aluminium foil that I crinkled. And lastly, I'm just basically like roughly rounding off the edges to make it look like a cliff more or less, and to blend it in with the foil part. I didn't want to actually like have a straight edge there. And of course, can't not forget about the paper mache, because that's gonna be our base layer for the paint to stick on. So I mixed some sand paste with just some glue and some loose bird sand, and then I'm gonna apply a liberal amount of glue on the top of this, and I'm just gonna add loose sand here. Basically, I want this a bit more textured than it is right now, but I don't want to use aluminium foil on this flat surface. And then it's just time to repeat the same stone painting steps with black and a dry brush of white. Since the cave part will be a bit more humid, I'm actually doing a liberal dry brush of a mossy green. Now, liberal on the top surface at least, I'm gonna go over that with brown to mute it down a little bit, to make it like a sandy, like mossy, like grass type ledge. And I just put a little bit of moss on the rocks. For the bottom and the sides, I basically just painted up some blue, and for the bottom like a sandy color, and I'm adding a lot of natural stones that I may or may not have stolen out of our garden. Don't tell anybody. But yeah, these will work perfectly, and all I need to basically do to blend them into the sandy color on the bottom a bit more is to make a really like wet black wash. And this will help it like go into all of the nooks and crannies. I actually used a bit less black than I normally would and a bit more mortar, and it fits perfectly. Now, since this is underwater, I thought I wanted to try out a really cool effect, which is like, you know, when the water surface kind of makes these cool ripples underneath on the surface. So I really wanted to try that, and I thought, why not? Because, as I said before, this is kind of more of a cartoonish and not a realistic diorama, so I'm just using some light blue and white to add those in. Now, the slit on the rock that I cut before, of course, was covered by aluminium foil, but it was actually really easy to cut through that layer again. And all I'm doing here is using my ruler to actually make the slit a bit wider, and it actually fit really perfectly. To secure the other side, the easiest thing is either to use resin or super glue. I decided for super glue because that will bond with the paper nicely and make it a bit more sturdy. Then I added the other ledge, and I added the watercolor where the waterline stops. So just a basically darker blue to represent the water. Now lastly I just add on the backing, and then I'm going to adorn everything with a little bit of moss. Just a little bit of fake moss to cover some of the edges, have it like run down like vines on the sides. And I think this one actually looks really nice with all the details. And then all I need to do is basically just put in all of the figurines that I have. Now, as I mentioned before in the previous one, I have way more figurines than fit in here, and I'm gonna like tone it down and put less in there than I actually have later. I just really wanted to put all of them in here for now, because I don't have any other displays. But I'm definitely gonna get some later. Anyways, here's actually the finished ones. Now, I lost one or two Pokemon into oblivion. I don't know where exactly they went into the diorama, but some of them fell. Ignore those, they're sleeping. But yeah, overall, super happy with this one, especially the one with the water layer. I just love that one, and I think less crowded they would look amazing. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you think of those. And I hope you have a great day. Bye!